Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. The scary stories will start in 15 seconds. Before they start, please like and subscribe. Alright, on to the stories. When I was younger, I used to live in the woods, and I could see a cemetery from my back porch. One Easter, I remember walking up and seeing the Easter Bunny, one of those terrifying costumes. And what really gets me is I remember smelling the wet hay. When I woke up, I didn't tell anyone, but there was an extra Easter egg in my house that my parents didn't hide. Years later, when I was in high school, I asked my parents if they ever dressed up like an Easter Bunny and came into our room, and they said they would never go through that much trouble. Then my younger sister, who I shared a bunk bed with, when this happened, she said she remembers seeing the Easter Bunny come into our room and made a remark about the hay smell. I was terrified that we both remembered seeing a person dressed as a bunny in our room. To make it even stranger, I told friends I sat with at lunch what happened. One of the girls was my neighbor across the street. She told me one Easter a long time ago she looked out her window during the night and saw the Easter Bunny standing there in her driveway. I had the chills. To this day, I'm terrified of people in rabbit costumes. When my niece was really young, she was in a bouncer at my sister's house, and I was at that house babysitting. I had left her to go to the kitchen to grab some water. My sister's chocolate labs were probably sniffing and licking her head because I could hear her giggling like she was having a blast. I hadn't noticed how cold it had gotten. Then I heard it, a loud wooden snap, like a thick piece of wood had been snapped in half, or a tree was knocked over. I ran into the room, and what I saw and smelled freaked me out. The dogs were huddled in the corner, whimpering. My niece was just staring in the ceiling corner with wide eyes. I took her, and we decided to go into a different room. When my sister finally came home, I told her what happened. She just rolled her eyes and said, "That is Hugh." I was confused. She said Hugh was the previous owner of the house who had died 10 years before his wife sold it. She said he likes to follow my niece around, and you can tell it's him because the dogs freak and it gets cold and smells like cheap cologne. I don't believe in that, but I do believe that feeling you get when your gut gets wrenched when something doesn't feel right. In college, I would go home every other weekend to work at the job that I had since high school. I would drive directly from campus after my last class on Friday to my job about an hour after my shift was done. I'd go back to my parents' house, which was in the middle of nowhere. My parents weren't home yet when I got back from work. They often spend their Friday and Saturday evenings drinking, like when they were in college. So the house was dark, and since it was mid-fall, so was the yard, save for some yard light. I pulled into my normal parking spot, got out of the car, and then turned to open the back door of my car and get my backpack out of the back seat. That's when I noticed the bathroom light was on. Was that the light on when I pulled up? It must have been, right? As I was contemplating the light and reaching for my backpack, there was suddenly a very angry, old-looking woman standing in the window staring at me. We're not talking about a resting face either. She was pissed off at me, and I knew it. We stood there staring at each other for a good 10 seconds when my parents pulled up into the driveway and distracted me from my stare down with the woman in the bathroom. By the time I turned back, the light was still on, but the woman was gone. I used to volunteer at a nursing home where we had several instances where new residents accurately described former residents down to specific nightgowns and color of glasses, and I and the staff knew had died in that room and complained about them coming into the room at night. Then once I was walking through the hallway and it was normally uncomfortably warm inside, but I felt a chill and goosebumps. One of the CNAs said I just had walked through a ghost. I couldn't get warm again for the rest of the day. There were flickering lights and TVs turning themselves on. Several of the staff were from the same Southeast Asian country, and they were talking about ghosts and disrespect for the dead so much that management had someone come in and do a candlelight ceremony, and this lady in crystals and dreadlocks came to do a sage brushing. Things calmed down after that. Lights stayed on better and the residents seemed calmer. I was in my sophomore year of high school. I would usually get ready and then wait for my mother to drive me to school. While she was getting ready, I was just kind of hanging out in the bathroom with her while she was putting on makeup and curling her hair. She looked a little frazzled and I asked if everything was okay. She told me about a weird occurrence the night before. She told me that she had been woken her up around 2 o'clock by a strange noise. It wasn't super loud, but it was pretty constant. My dad wasn't woken up by it, though it's not surprising as he sleeps like a log. Anyway, she starts looking for the source of the noise, first checking the bathroom attached to their room, but there isn't anything there. Next, she walks out into the hall and hears the noise from the bathroom nearby. When she walks in, she sees a hairdryer plugged in and turned on, just sitting in the middle of the bath mat on the floor. She thinks it's strange, but there are 4 kids living in the house, and she thought maybe one of them had sleepwalked and turned it on. Whatever, she unplugs it and puts it away. She goes back into the bed and eventually falls asleep. About an hour later, she wakes up again and hears the same noise. She's kind of mad at this time and goes to check it out. Except now the noise is from downstairs. She tracks it into the guest bathroom in the only main entry hall. My parents' house has like 4 bathrooms. She opens the door, and again, there's a hairdryer turned on laying in the middle of the floor. She's freaked out by this point, but she unplugs it and puts it away. She didn't get a great night's sleep after that. So she's telling me the story, and as soon as it comes to the conclusion, we both just freeze and turn our heads into the walk-in closet of her bathroom. As soon as we look in there, the entire light of the ceiling shatters. Not the bulb, but the glass cover. It shatters, sending shards of glass everywhere. We yelp. We both freak and get the heck out of there. We don't know what to make of it, but we really haven't had any experiences weird before or since, and none of my family have experienced anything either. I was the caretaker of a small, uninhabited island on the coast of Maine, and my girlfriend and I started having synchronized nightmares about things that we had never discussed before. They involved very specific themes, and after a month of this happening, we were gifted a history book of the island and a small chapter in the back that mentioned the exact hauntings. Hauntings are real. My mother was having dinner at a friend's house. It was a small old cottage that had been around for about 100 years. She tried to find the bathroom and pulls on a door that's locked. The friend sees it and says, "Sorry, that goes to the basement. The bathroom's over there." Thinking it is odd, my mother asks why the basement door is locked. "It's always locked. In fact, I don't even have a key for it. The real estate agent advised me not to go down there, as it has not been upgraded like the rest of the college. It's a little more than a root cellar." Fast forward a few weeks when my mother, who works for the police department, is working on a project about the history of the police department in the town. An old woman comes up with the news clippings about various community events, as well as news clippings from the 50s about a gruesome murder. My mom was taken a bit aback. "Sorry, I forgot these clippings were in here too." "No, I know this address. It's my friend's house. What happened here?" "Oh," said the man. "Well, that used to be my mother's house. She had been dating this man who was cruel to her, beat her horribly. She tried again and again to break it off with him, but he'd always come back. Finally, my aunt moved in with us, and my mother finally broke up with him." He starts getting emotional. "Then one night he broke in and tied my mother, aunt, sister, and brother up in the basement. He shot them all in front of my mother. Then he shot her and killed himself, leaving a note that said that she would never leave him again. I was away at college," he started to sob. "And that is how my mother's friend learned that she had a haunted quadruple murder-suicide scene in her basement. She moved out a year later." A good friend of mine was doing his rounds as a young intern. He is now a neurosurgeon, and he had just looked into a dying patient. After making the patient comfortable, he exited the room, sat on a nearby chair to write his report. After a few minutes, he looked up and saw this patient walking down the hallway. He called the woman, but there was no response. As he stood up to walk after her, she disappeared. He quickly walked towards the patient's room and saw a light under the door. When he opened the door, it was completely dark in the room, so he turned on the light and went over to the patient and felt her pulse. She had died. He swears that it was true to this day. While in university, I loved finding snakes. I was a biology student. So a friend from my club showed me down this road that he would cruise for snakes. Cruising is when you drive slowly down old back roads after dark, looking for snakes that have slithered into the warmer road to heat up. The road we took was about 4 miles and had 4 houses on its entire length. We had taken a few laps on this road and we were making our final pass. There are 2 houses near the beginning of the road, one at the end and one near the middle. We were getting close to the center house when we see movement from the left side of the road. There are a lot of animals on this road, so we weren't surprised to see this. However, what shoots out is this kid, probably around 8 or 9, in torn blue jeans and a ripped dark shirt. He takes one look at us, and his face is a mix of fear and pain. He looks back quickly where he had come, and then booked it across the road. The guy I'm with gets out of the car and chases the kid to see if he's all right, and I pull the car up to the point where the boy went into the woods. I'm starting to get out of the car when my friend walks quickly back from the trail and says, "Let's go now." We hop in the car and tear out of there. He says that there is a graveyard about 10 yards into the woods where there are 5 gravestones with the same death date. They all had the same last name, and one was a boy who was 9. We never came back the rest of the summer to that road. We would usually go once or twice a week. The next year, when my friend had graduated, I took my girlfriend out to the road. We had gone early to try to find different types of snakes. We got to the house near the graveyard, and there was 3 men doing some yard work. I rolled down the window and explained what I was doing and asked them about the graveyard. Apparently, their dad's brother's family had all died when their space heater caught on fire around 20 years ago. I kept pushing and asking about it, and they told me the firemen, or whatever does it, had found all the bodies in the rubble except for the youngest son, but they assumed he was too far burned. I asked if they had a little brother, and the 6'4", 250-pound man said he was the youngest. When I gave the description of the kid I saw, they all went white. They have all individually seen the kid I was talking about, and he always runs to the gravesite. I have never been down that road again. A few weeks after my mom gave birth to me, she went to me in the middle of the night because I was crying. When she went into the room, she saw a dark figure of a man who she thought was my dad holding me and decided to go back to sleep. In the morning, she thanks my dad for taking care of me. As it turns out, my dad was not even awake, and no one else was in the apartment. It gets worse. Later on in my life, not only me but my sister, cousins, and friends have all seen it somewhere in our home, all in separate different accounts, and we don't usually tell people about it unless they've seen it. It follows us whenever we move, and at this point, me and my family all learn to ignore it, although we know it's there. When I was 12, me and my mom were watching TV in her bedroom. It was one of those really stuffy summer evenings. Stating the obvious, I said aloud, "It is so hot in here." Immediately, the fan that was sitting on the dresser, 5 feet away, turned on. The switch couldn't have been flipped by accident. It was a pretty sticky switch and required a little bit of force to go from off to on. I can't really explain how that happened, but I'd like to think it was just a friendly ghost. In middle school, my friend was in a church youth group, and they often had those overnights at the church, and he used to invite me to them, and they were actually lots of fun. Towards the end of the night, this one particular day, the guy who ran it would let us play manhunt the entire church area, which was actually a mess, yield, kitchen, rec hall, nursery, etc. We turned literally every light on the whole place, and all we had were little tiny flashlights. It was so spooky but so much fun. One of these nights we were playing and we decided to hide in a closet in the nursery. We hid there for about 10 minutes, and out of nowhere we heard a baby crying. We all got spooked and bolted out of there. In the morning we went back to the nursery to see what could have caused it. We figured it was one of those toy baby dolls that would cry, but we found nothing. Still spooks me to this day, but I would give anything to relieve it because I love this paranormal stuff. This was actually on Halloween morning one year. I lived in a small apartment with an open floor plan where you could see the entire apartment from the kitchen. I was in the kitchen packing my lunch to take to work when the TV turned on by itself, volume on full blast to some static Y channel that kept cutting in and out. I was nowhere near the TV remote or the TV and had no other people or animals living with me that could have done it accidentally. Probably the scariest thing I've ever experienced. I'm sure there's perfectly reasonable explanations for this happened, but it definitely freaked me out, and it hasn't happened before or since. Thank you for listening. As always, please like and subscribe. It helps me out a lot. Have a good night.